Before we start, Paul, guys, I'll let you introduce yourself. Paul is a very good friend of Dunwoody, graduate of Dunwoody. He hired a lot of ECDM students, and he's coming today to, as a friend of Dunwoody and as an employer too, to talk to the ECDM students because I think we're dear to your heart, aren't we?
That is.
And we'll say a few things about your history with Dunwoody and so forth. So,
Okay.
and here's Paul.
Well, I came to Dunwoody back in 1974 as a construction and maintenance electrician student, and I went through the 2-year program here. I got out and have had a varied career as first as an electrician. I worked as a maintenance electrician for a couple of years, and then I got in the union, became a union electrician, which I did for 17 years. And then back in the 90s, I started a company. I was getting higher and higher in the electrical contracting field, running bigger and bigger projects. I've run high-rise buildings and hospital buildings and manufacturing plants and all different kind of things like that. So I worked in just about anything you can imagine, shopping malls, that type of thing, both as an electrician and as a foreman for other electrician. And then back in the 90s, I went into the management side of things. I started a business, electrical contracting business with some partners, and really started delving into what makes an electrical contracting business work. And part of this is stuff I've developed over the years to train new employees, both design employees, estimators, foremen, and that type of thing, so they can kind of understand the economics of contracting. Right now, I own a small electrical contracting company. We have about 15 employees. I have a former design student working for me out of Dunwoody. I think I actually hired one of the very first ones out of the very first class, Tim White. Is he still involved? Okay. Okay, yeah, Tim White, I think I hired him back in about 96 or 7, something like that. And along the way, I probably hired 15 or more students, talked to a lot of classes. I've been very involved in Dunwoody with the alumni group fundraising and program development and that type of thing. So you guys and what you're doing is near and dear to my heart. I think my role, my ability to come to Dunwoody and my involvement with Dunwoody over the years, particularly when I went from being a college student to being a full-time worker and then coming back to Dunwoody as a technical college and learning a trade, it profoundly changed my whole life. It changed my outlook on work, and it changed the opportunities that I was given along the way. And so I feel in a lot of ways I owe a lot to Dunwoody, to the instructors, to the benefactors of Dunwoody, and that's why I continually stay involved. So one of the things I think that happens is when you get out into the world, when you come out of school, you don't quite understand what you're delving into. And one of the things I like to do with the students is come back and kind of explain what goes on in the business, to learn the business side of the business. And I think it opens your eyes as you're learning the design and as you're learning the project management piece of it and estimating. It makes a little more sense to you where you fit in the grand scheme of how an electrical business works or how the whole industry works. Some of you will probably end up doing pure design, maybe working for an engineering firm or a large contractor where that's all you do. When you're in that role, the importance of what I'm going to tell you about is still out there. You are daily involved with some of the decision making that we're going to talk about, but when you're doing a design, usually there's budget constraints on any design that you do. And so for you to be able to learn materials and methods and that type of thing so that you can do a cost-effective design. I've taken designs from engineers and looked at them and thought, you know, they're designing a grocery store and it looks like they're designing a power plant by the means and methods. You know, they want rigid pipe in the slab and they want you know, heavy duty motor starters and all these different things, and I'm looking at it as, criminy, it's a grocery store. They'll be here, they'll be out of business in 5 years, or they'll do a major remodel or that type of thing. We see that too with retail. If you look at office centers or these office warehouse strips or retail strip malls, most of the tenants there are on a lease, and it's usually a fairly short duration, 3 to 5 year lease. And so the type of wiring we do for that kind of a customer is going to be different than we do for somebody like Xcel Energy or maybe a college that's building their buildings to last 100 years, because what we're doing for that retail tenant or that office tenant is we're building them something that'll last the length of the lease. Obviously, it'll last longer than that, but it's not something we're building to last 50 or 100 years. So from the design perspective, that's where you kind of fall into it. But if you start working for a contractor, that's where this kind of contractor matrix I've kind of made here. And I did this because when I was running a contracting business and you'd hire somebody new in the office, they were involved in one or two roles in the office and may not have had any idea how that fit into the big picture of things. So I put together kind of a flow chart here of different responsibilities in different departments and how that flowed down to the primary aim of our business, which was an installation and being able to make money on the installation. That's why that's my green colored block there. That's where the money is in the installation. It's how well you do that is if you're going to make money or not make money in the business. So you can see there's a lot of moving parts or a lot of departments. Project managing is where ultimately a lot of you will end up. Estimating is another function that can either be blended with project management or be a separate discipline entirely. Field operations. Sometimes if you're working in a small company, even as a project manager, you're going to get your fingers into that. Supervising foremen, making sure your materials get out there, that type of thing. Logistics and support work fairly close with field operations. How do we buy the material? How do we get it to the site? How do we handle returns? That type of thing. Then on the other side of the business, on the true clerical or management side of the business, you have your accounting and information systems. How do we keep track of it? How do we purchase? How do we pay our workers? That type of thing. And then there's clerical support. How do we handle writing a proposal? How do we handle writing a purchase order? How do we keep track of the contracts and things that are basically the legal document side of what we do? And over here, you'd also see HR. How do we handle all the issues that deal with HR, fringe benefits, vacations, discipline, and that type of thing, and fall into that. But if you kind of follow the arrows here, on our side of the business, where we're talking about project managing, estimating, and field operations, project managers get out there and do marketing and sales. They got to go out and find an opportunity first. You know, you've developed relationships with general contractors. You may use, there's services out there, Read Construction Bulletin and Blue Book and places like that that generate leads, general contractors that are looking for subcontractors. And that creates opportunities for you, and then you got to do something with that opportunity. They send you a bid request. There'll be plans and specs involved. You know, you got to get that information together, and it flows over into estimating. When it gets to estimating is, how do you know how to price the stuff up? You aren't going to look up every part and piece in a catalog. You're not going to call your buddy and see what he would charge for the job. We literally sit down, and you do a little bit of that in second year, where you sit down and you do a detailed estimate. You count and measure the parts and the pieces of the job, and that's almost more of an accounting function. It helps to know how the job is put together, but that estimate that you're putting together really does two things. It gives us a number that we're going to try and sell to the general contractor. Sometimes we're competing with very often we're competing with other contractors for that work. So we've got to be careful how much we build into that price or we won't get the job. So there's always this tug of war between what's our risk on the job, what are our parts costs, you know, what's our labor cost, and how am I going to put that number together that it's a high enough number that I can do the job for that and make a profit, but it's low enough that I can secure the work. It's a continual kind of tug of war. And it's really fun. Those of us that do it and have done it for years, you look at it almost as a game. If you like to compete, if that gets your juices going, you like to play soccer, you like to, you know, play ball or whatever the thing is. I have a elderly gentleman that's a friend of mine in this business, 80 years old, and he's still working in the business. And he was a baseball player through his whole life. He played minor league ball. He played in the military. He played college ball for the U. And when people ask him, Jerry, why do you still do this? His answer is, it's the only sport I can still play. 80 years old, he's hobbling around, but he's still playing this game. So it ends up being a lot of fun. So if you see down here, part of the marketing and sales starts with relationships. How do you know how to get your leads? Who do you know? Who invites you? How bad do they want you to do the job? Then your vendor relationships also come into it. I've got to buy my light fixtures from Viking or Graybar or Werner Electric or somebody. If I have good relationships with those vendors, I may get preferred pricing. They may give me better discounts because I pay my bills on time or something like that. So your vendor relationships come into it. Your estimator training, and we were talking about, we develop a database and the estimators work from a system. I have an actual system I teach people how to estimate. How do you do a takeoff? How do you enter it into AccuBid, which that's our software that we use for estimating. And then how do we massage the number within AccuBid? I mean, do we take the straight out labor number that's in there? Do we massage that? Do we put different discounts on the material because we know we can buy it cheaper? There's a lot involved in that, but the idea is to come up with as an accurate an estimate as we can to know the cost of doing that job. If you're good at it, if you get good at it, we can nail jobs literally on the material side within 1 or 2% of what the actual material ends up costing us at the end of the job. We've just done enough of it. You know, there's always going to be some variations. I figured running 2 1/2-inch down there, and the electrician looked at it and says, well, if I combine them, I can pull both runs into 3/4 or something like that. So there's going to be some variation of the way it actually gets installed in the field. But ultimately, we start out with a number that includes all the parts and pieces and all the labor we need to build that job. And then on bid day, this is something that's kind of a dirty little secret, is there's bid day deals. You get vendors that'll call you up and they really want to see them get the job and you get the job. They'll call up and say, okay, there's a number out there on the street for the fixtures. It's $10,000. Because you're a good customer, you can take 3% off that number or 5% off that number, or they'll call out another like $1 deduct or something like that that gives you. So that's where the relationships really come into it, is if you're in good with your vendors, there's opportunity there to kind of scoop your competition. Then once you get a good number together and you win the bid in your competitive bidding, then what you do is go back and start doing your purchasing, figuring out who you're actually going to buy the material from and that, and you come up with a working budget for the job. You kind of just retool your estimate. A lot of times we'll do that in AccuBid. We'll just copy out our budget and then come back and say, okay, I put in $4,000 for trenching, and Joe called me up and said he'd do all the trenching on the job for $3,600, so you change that part of your estimate, and you keep massaging it until you come up with your budget. So once you get your working budget, there's a little more to it where you got to get permits together and stuff like that. You're ready to actually start the installation, purchase the material, and things like that. So any questions so far? Am I going too fast? Making sense? Not making sense? I'll talk a little bit about some other parts of the business and how they feed into the installation. So now we're out there with the job going on. Part of what we do with our field operations, when I had a bigger company, we actually had a guy that was a superintendent or a general foreman, and part of the kickoff of a job is you'd select who you're going to have for the foreman to run the job. If it's a bigger job, like a whole shopping mall, let's say, you'd probably have a general foreman that had maybe 20 years of experience and a guy you could trust that could manage the job. You'd sit down with your superintendent, with your general foreman, and you'd go through kind of the information for the job, how you did your estimate, what type of materials you're going to use, what are the risks that you see, what are special things, like maybe in a shopping mall you might say, well, that atrium in the middle is 60 feet tall, and you know, we know the general contractor is going to build a scaffold, so we're going to do all our work when the scaffold is up. Or you might have looked at it another way and says, I've got money in there to rent boom lifts to do all this work, or whatever, but this is your opportunity to sit down with the foreman and kind of explain how you envisioned the job when you estimated it. So one of the interesting things about estimating that I don't think comes across when you're in school is the best estimators, the people that really get it, are people that understand how the stuff is installed. I've taken people out of the design program that didn't have any background in installation. They don't know the difference between a 200 amp panel and a 2000 amp panel. So when they estimate it, unless somebody tells them, panel's a panel, right? It takes 2 hours to put in a panel. But if you had a 2000 amp panel, it might be a 3-section switchboard. It might take 2 guys 2 days to move it in place, assemble it, terminate it, that type of thing. Where a 200 amp panel, a guy can put it in by himself in a couple of hours. So those are advantages you have if you understand what goes on in the field. That's one thing. If you end up in contracting, that would be one thing to try and get the shop to do for you, is to help you get out into the field occasionally. You go on tours with other project managers and that type of thing, especially if you know they're doing something unique, like they're putting in a service or they're putting in a generator or wiring an elevator or something that you don't see very often. Ask for those opportunities to get out there and take a look at those things. Another thing that I've done over the years that I think bigger shops do, but very often small shops don't do, is training your foreman so that your foremen understand, best practices, how to do things, how to motivate their employees, how to deal with the customer, how to handle the company paperwork, personnel problems, OSHA inspections. There's a lot of stuff that goes through foreman training so that your foremen can be good representatives for you out there. So this whole field operations thing is really the primary driver of what happens in the installation. But you'll also see logistics and support is really important. Is how do they get the tools? How do they get the material? Scissor lifts, ladders, all those different things. How are you set up for that type of thing? And I got a few other things here: manpower, crew, and size and training. How do you decide? Part of that's driven by your estimate, especially on a bigger job. You take your estimate and you look at it. So you got a job that's 50,000 hours. I did a hotel downtown Minneapolis, 55,000 hours spread over nearly 2 years. I think it was a 20-month project. How do you know how many guys to have on the job at any given time? You kind of look at your estimate. You look at, okay, I'm expected to have this many floors done by the 1st of December, and that incorporates 1,200 man hours worth of work. Okay, if I got 1,200 man hours and I've got 8 weeks to complete it, how many guys do I need to do 1,200 hours worth of work in 8 weeks? And so you kind of build your crews looking at your estimate and your schedule to understand how to man the job. If you put too many guys on it, one of two things could happen. You blow by, you get it done too soon, they're not ready for you to move to the next area. Now you got to lay off part of your crew. And if you don't have enough guys on it, you get to the end, the last week or 2 weeks, now you're throwing overtime at it, which adds cost to it. So there's kind of a balancing act there in how we handle that. Another thing we do with that manpower, and this ends up being, in some shops it's the foreman's responsibility, in some shops it's the individual electricians, is we do labor tracking. We track by labor codes as to what the guy's working on a given day, so we can keep track of a couple of things. One, we know where we are on our budget. If I put in, 3,000 hours to do feeders, and that 3,000 hours ends up being $150,000 worth of labor, I'll want to know where I am on my feeders so that I can keep track. If I'm halfway done with my feeders, I should have used up half of my labor. If I'm tracking, I'm going beyond that point, then as a manager, I'm going to want to step in and say, do I have the wrong foreman? Don't they have the right tools? Are they missing direction? Is the general contractor screwing them up because he won't let them work where they need to work? That type of thing. Another thing that kind of ties in with everything, and I'll go through this a lot faster, but accounting and information systems. This labor tracking information usually comes from payroll, how you enter your payroll. That feeds back into 2 places. It comes back into accounting and information systems, so we can do payroll and work comp and that type of thing. But that labor tracking also comes up into tracking our budget, and building our new estimates. If I find out that AccuBid says it takes 16 hours 100 to run 3-inch pipe, and my guys are routinely running it in 12 hours 100, I'm keeping track of it, that's a competitive edge for me. So the next job, when I have 3-inch pipe on it, I can bid lower, knowing my guys can put it in so fast, and that gives me the opportunity then to secure more work. And actually, in my training of foremen, I was in the union environment for 30 years. And in training of foremen, I got guys here that in a lot of ways are more loyal to the union than they are to the shop. And so I have to figure out a way to motivate them to get them to work faster and not think of it just as a paycheck. And one of the things I always presented to them was, if we can get these labor units down and bid more competitively, you won't get laid off. You'll have a job for longer. You know, and we built these teams that literally were very, very good at what they did. And you could kind of secure your work that way. If you look at some of the big shops in town right now, and one that comes to mind is Parsons Electric. I know them fairly well and how their systems work inside. They're big on managing by metrics. They were one of the first shops in town that did that, meaning that they would, if they were doing an apartment building, they would say, okay, we should have X number of dollars of rough-in per apartment, X number of dollars for the hallways or hours for the hallways, and they would literally have a cost accountant keeping track on each floor. Okay, now we had allotted 1,200 hours to do this floor, and it took 1320, we're 10% over on our labor, what's going on? And then you find out, well, for instance, the framing contractor might not be framing the rooms complete, so you have to do part of the room to keep up with the schedule, and then when you get all done, they put all the front walls on, and then you got to come back and rework every single room to finish it. Then you're going to, as a project manager, you're going to sit down with the general contractor and say, you're killing us on our labor here because of the method that they've chosen to do. You'd probably approach the drywall contractor first and try and get him to work with you, but if you can't get him to work with you, then you're going to go after the general contractor who is actually a customer and have them work it out. So those are part of having information and feedback and things like that, is so that you can adjust on the fly. It's like being in a battle. If you're shooting over the hill and you don't know how many bad guys you're killing, you know, you're not going to keep wasting bullets until you can figure out if you're being effective. Because you can burn up your whole budget on a job early on in the job. You get towards the end of the job, you're out of money, you still have to finish the job. Your boss will be breathing down your neck. So other functions that happen over in the accounting and information system, they'll do your payroll for you. They'll help you with your job costing by giving you feedback for your estimating. They handle the accounts receivable, they bill the customers. A lot of times you get involved in this if you're a project manager, you have to tell them how much to bill based on where you are in the project, and then they handle cash management, making sure there's enough money in the checking account to pay the bills. This is kind of going away. I actually did this diagram back in the 1990s, and I've changed it very little since then, but we used to have more clerical support where they helped us with our proposal writing. Pretty much now the project managers usually have templates and they write their own proposals. Contract review, that's usually a management thing. The contract is a legal document. It tells you what you're allowed to do, not allowed to do, what kind of recourse there is if you don't meet the deadlines and that type of thing. Bonding and insurance, we have to keep track of if we put a bond on a job, insure the job. Our safety program, shop drawings and submittals. If we have time at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about shop drawings and submittals. Panel schedules and O&M manuals. That's something you'll kind of come across when you do design work, is that when you lay out a job and you want to tell somebody how to buy it out and how to build it, is when you lay out your circuits, you do panel schedules. You basically do kind of a load sheet for each panel that says what all the breakers are and so forth. And then the O&M manuals flow out of manufacturer information that you have to give back to the owner of the building when you get done. But what we do with your panel schedules is, if we've had to rearrange a panel, if there's been change orders during the job or something like that, when we get to the end of the job, We do typewritten panel schedules for every single panel on the job that tells what breaker goes to what circuit or what room, or we try and give them as much information as we can on the panel schedules. The O&M manuals, maybe if we get to the end, I'd like to talk about how the procurement process works, and because that'll be important to people that are doing purely design. If you work in an engineering firm or work for an architect, that whole procurement process kind of flows two ways. They specify what they want us to buy. We go out to vendors and try and buy exactly what they told us to buy. The vendors respond to us with pricing and drawings, and we send that to the architects and engineers for approval. But I'll go over that whole process at the end. So any questions so far? Going too fast?
I hope that will, especially the first year here, I hope will give you an idea how the business is put together. I know you were probably looking at it, and you are barely doing parallel series circuit and combo right now and electronics, but that's what you're in it for. It's not just another parallel circuit. I know you guys get stuck with parallel series circuit and transistors and what's not, and you don't see the big picture. That's the big picture. That's why you're in it. So stick in. It's a good field. That's what I'm trying to assure the industry, especially. It's a good field to be in. You're going to make money and you're going to like it. So
it's really interesting because I hear this at my company a lot. Now we have about 16 or 17 employees. And what I hear a lot from the other guys who work in the office and my field foreman and stuff, it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't. You're out there. I mean, we have a good time at what we do, and like I say, there's a sense of competition. There's a sense of accomplishment that you're getting stuff done. And let me see if I can work your PowerPoint. But ultimately, isn't that what we're all in it for? You probably came to Dunwoody hoping you can get a job that you can make more money than before you went to Dunwoody, right? And hopefully doing something that you like and that you have an aptitude for. So, well, the contractor's in it for the same thing. When I was an employee, all I worried about was my paycheck and made sure that that didn't bounce and that I got my next promotion. That was important to me. But when you start getting deeper into the management of construction companies, you realize there's a motivation for them too. They're heavily invested in their company. They may have $1 million, $2 million of equity tied up in their company that if they sold their company, they could take that money and go to the Bahamas. But they stay in it because they want a return on their investment. And frankly, a lot of them enjoy playing the game too. It's something, you got to do something with your time, might as well do this. A really interesting thing when you start estimating, and these figures are kind of rough, but they're taken from many years of experience, is that if this $100 bill represented a contract, a sale, okay? I made a sale, I sold a $100 job, okay? We never sell anything that small anymore, but it gives you an idea. The commodity material, which for us is the pipe, the wire, maybe the wiring devices, the boxes, the wire nuts and all that, stuff that we can plan from our estimate and buy out at the beginning of the job. That commodity material is only about 15% of the typical project. Now, projects are going to vary because the commodity material, if you have a job that's rigid pipe or you have a job that's, Romex, the commodity materials are going to be a different portion of the job. Quoted materials for us are things that were specified in the specification book that they told us, okay, you got to use square D switchgear, and you got to use a Generac generator, and you got to use Lithonia lighting fixtures. And so we go out on bid day, we get quotes for all that stuff, and we put it in a little different part of our estimate because those are kind of fixed costs that we know we have to pay because they've specified those materials. So our quoted or specified materials are another 20% of the job. And some jobs you'll see this slide because, they might not specify the light fixtures. It's like a commercial office building, and we're rearranging the light fixtures that are there and just matching them, 10% new or something like that. So these numbers will slide around. But in general, our material is going to represent about 35% of our job, 40% of our job. And in reality, those are costs we can nail down with our estimate. If you think of it, if you're building something, if you're building a garage, you can go to Menards and say, how much for the 2x4s, how much for the sheeting, how much for the shingles and all that other stuff. And once you nail that price down, it's not going to change, right? They'll give you a quote, okay, it's $4,900. You can take that $4,900 and put it in your estimate, and you know that's what you're going to spend on it. Your commodity materials about the same way. So say there's things they don't quote you, nails, anchor bolts, or whatever. You can kind of figure out, okay, I need so many nails or so much a pound. Here's what it's going to cost you. That's kind of what we're doing with our commodity materials. And from experience, we get that really close. We're within a few percentage points when the job winds up. Another thing that we end up purchasing is subcontractor work. And so for us, subcontractor work, we don't do fire alarm work. We don't do burglar alarms. We don't do security cameras. We don't do trenching and excavating. So we'd hire other contractors to do that work for us. Again, this is usually a fixed number for us. We send them the plans and specifications. They come back to us with a bid. We take their bid and roll it into our bid. And now that all kind of adds up into the job costs. The next big piece of it, so if you look at this, this adds up to about 40% of the sales dollar of the contract. The next big piece of it is our labor costs, 40%. Now the labor cost is where our risk is in the job. Because what kind of things can affect the labor costs? Anybody got any ideas?
Work slow.
Somebody works slow? Yeah, if you have a problem with the union agreement. Say you have somebody that has a really bad attitude on the job, or you have some kind of disagreement between the trades, that kind of thing could slow you down. What about other people on the job? Yeah, how about a general contractor that doesn't know how to run a schedule? We're doing a job right across the street at the Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church. The job was supposed to be done the 1st of September. We just were able to do our rough-in about a week and a half ago. And the rough-in is usually something you do in the first couple of weeks of the job. That job's been going on since July. We've got a general contractor there that doesn't know how to manage his subs, so people come and go whenever they want to. And I finally had it out with the guy because the other day he called me up and he wanted my guys to come back to run a piece of 1-inch pipe about 100 feet long because he wanted to close up an area. I said, no, you call me back when you got a few days work for my guys to do. I'm not going to send somebody back to do 4 or 5 hours worth of work because he kills all the trades with having to drive there, unload your truck, go in, do 4 hours worth of work and leave. When we bid a construction job, we bid it that we're going to show up, we're going to work, and it usually is kind of a bell curve where you start out with one guy on the job, getting it figured out, getting it laid out, and that type of thing. You add a crew, you build up the crew, and you work diligently for several weeks or months, and then you taper off at the end to just some finishing guys, cleanup guys. Well, what this job has been doing is it's 0, 3, 0, 1, 0, 3, 0, 1, and there's big gaps in between there. And what happens for us is I can't always send that same one guy back because now I've assigned him to another job that he can't leave. He's running something, he's working on a deadline. So the general contractor can really wreak havoc on your labor costs.
You get there, you have no idea what's going on.
Right? And so one of the things you can do as a contractor, and we do it quite regularly, is we tend to stick with the same generals that we know how to run a project, and we know they're going to get in, run the job, and get out. Or, for instance, this job, I bid this job to 3 generals that I knew, and I didn't bid the guy that I didn't know. And he called me up and said, hey, I heard you bid this job, and he says, we've secured the job, will you send me your number? We sent him our number, but we added some money onto it, because with an unknown general contractor, you have these unknown risks. And so that was one strategy we used. Unfortunately, I don't think I added quite enough money on it, so it's not going to be that great of a job. So another thing that it can affect your labor costs, what about weather? What about if you figured, you bid this job in May, you figured, oh, they got to be digging the hole and bringing it out of the ground in June and July and August, and maybe by September we'll have it all closed in and we'll work inside this winter. Then all of a sudden they hit bad soils. Okay, that delays the project. And now they got trouble getting their permit, and that delays the project. And the steel workers are on strike, so that delays the project. And pretty soon they're digging the hole of the 1st of November, and they're expecting you to work over the winter. So what we do on our proposals is we put right in there that this doesn't include winter construction costs. So that if they delay the project, even if we thought it was going to start in May, if they delay the project and they run us into winter construction costs, we can come back to them and say, hey, read my proposal. Here's what it costs me to work in the winter time, you know. People can't be as efficient because they're wearing Carhartts instead of a t-shirt. Well, that type of thing. So the labor costs are the high variation in there. Another thing that can affect your labor costs is how busy are we? Do I have 10 of my best guys to send to this job because I'm not really busy? Or am I going to be able to send maybe 1 leader, 2 regular guys from the shop, and then have to hire 7 new guys that I don't know anything about? So that's another area of risk on the labor is how well do I know the guys that are doing it? Another area of risk is if I'm a guy that usually does residential buildings and all of a sudden I get an opportunity to do a power plant, will I have the right tools? Do my people have the right skills? You know, do we know how to do this thing? So there's kind of a risk matrix. I'll maybe draw that out for you in a little bit here. But so those are all decisions that you make into how these labor costs are going to do. Then there's another line item here called general conditions. General conditions for us, we look at things like permit costs, equipment rental costs, storage costs, transportation costs. If we have travel for our guys, for instance, my shop's in New Brighton, if I get a job in St. Cloud, I know my guys are going to want to get paid a little extra to drive to St. Cloud, maybe an extra hour's labor a day, and pay for their mileage, or if they're driving my trucks, I have to pay for the mileage for them to go back and forth. That gets built into these general conditions. Sometimes in your contract, there's general conditions built in. They'll tell you that you have to have the switchgear tested by a third party, or the generator tested by a third party, or that you have to provide people for commissioning or special paperwork or things like that, bonding. That all shows up in your general conditions. Usually the general conditions are a fairly small part of it, but it's something that you don't want to miss when you're estimating. You want to make sure that you get it in there. Then there's another piece of it, and this is out of your sales dollar. Now I've got all my construction costs built in here. And if I do this right, I've got 15, 20, that's 35, 40, 80, 82% of my sales dollar is cost to get the job done. So that means I get an 18% gross profit on this job, and my home office overhead is 15%. Those are pretty standard numbers. So what does that tell you? What happens here? Out of that $100, this is what the owner / investor gets to keep, 3%. 3, 5. If you're really good in doing negotiated work, high margin work, you might be up to maybe 10%, but it's pretty rare to have a net profit any higher than that. Can you imagine that? I've committed to do $1 million job, and if everything goes perfect on the $1 million job, I'll make $30,000 when all is said and done. And if you could see on $1 million job, if I've got $400,000 in labor, if I go over 8% on my labor, I've eaten up all the profit for the year. So when my friends go to the casino and say, hey, Paul, you want to go to the casino? I say, what are you, nuts? I gamble every single day. I do high stakes gambling every single day. You know, how many of you ever gone to the casino? How many of you ever put like 700,000 or 800,000 on the table and let the dice roll? I have. Sometimes it doesn't work out so good. So here's a breakout of what we just talked about. Commodity materials about 15%, quoted material 20, subcontractors 5, labor costs 40, general conditions 2, company overhead 15. My total is 97%. My net profit at the end of the year is 3%. Now that you guys are all experts on how the estimate is put together, knowing that these numbers are as they are. If I wanted to try and affect the outcome, what would I work on? Where's the risk? Labor. How do I work on that labor? What can I do with that labor? Yeah, build the right size of crew. That's a good answer. Stay away from overtime. Do whatever you can to get your crew right size so you avoid overtime. What other ideas?
Don't worry about buying wire.
Don't worry about wire.
Little extra wire.
Little extra wire, yeah. That's you hit the nail on the head right there.
Costs a little extra
I'm gonna hire you.
material.
Anybody else got any ideas? What does it take to do an installation? Start out with, like, we got to tell the guys what to do, right? They got to have a plan. They got to have some leadership or something like that. What else does it take? What do we got to put in their hands if we want them to do it?
Tools.
Got to have tools, right? So we can control what's out there for tools. Do we give them some old crappy drill from Sears that's all broken down that only has one battery, so they got to take a coffee break every time their battery runs out?
Keto.
We're buying the best tools that we can, right? What about material? Think of this, if you're building the garage that we were talking about before. If you build trusses, or if you buy trusses, how fast do those go up? If you bought 2x6s and framed your own rafters, how long would that take? So we can look at things that get prefabbed. We can look at labor-saving materials. You know, what's the fastest way to do this? I used to do that when I was a foreman. I did a parking ramp downtown, a 5,000 car parking ramp. And so when we were going to install the fixtures, and the ramp, 5,000 car parking ramp, probably has 6,000 identical fixtures. And so what do? You go out there with that first fixture, you take it out of the box, and you look at the hardware they send with it, and you maybe try and install it on what you got roughed in and go, okay, this isn't going to work. The screws are too short in the box, so I got to have longer screws. And you got to reach way in here to do the set screw on the fixture, so I need a special tip for my drill. And, you know, I'm splicing in the box, so what do I use for wire nuts? And so what we do is I take one of my good electricians out there and we figure out the fastest way to put in the first fixture. And if it meant buying special drills, special tips, special wire nuts, whatever it was, making a bracket, having somebody fabricate a bracket for us, we'd go do that. And then we take some first-year cubbies and show them how we want it done. Some first-year apprentices and go, okay, we're putting you on this scissor lift. Here's how you got to get 22 fixtures a day done. Well, maybe my budget was only to do 16 fixtures a day, but I get extra work out of them because I figured out a fast way to do it. And if I put those two guys on opposite sides of the parking ramp, human nature, what are they going to do? Huh? They're going to compete. You know, one guy's going to come back and go, I got 16 by lunchtime, and the other guy goes, oh, I only got 14. Well, we'll fix that this afternoon, you know. And I've literally done that. I did the Hilton Hotel downtown, 818 guest rooms. All the guest room cable was pulled by two guys. Got a hallway down the middle, put one guy on each side of the hallway, show them how to do the first one, had the foreman lay everything out, and those two guys, they loved it. They'd get their headphones on and they'd run all day, stretching cable out, tying it down, cutting it off. Beat the labor. Because you found a way to motivate the guys that worked with their human nature. They were having fun. They were loving it. They didn't feel like they were being abused or overworked. They were having a good time. Another thing that you can do, you can find labor-saving materials. That job was one of the first jobs we used Quick Lock, I think it's called, on. And I got it. I got the prototypes from the rep that sold them. Can't remember who it was now, but I got the prototypes of the rep that sold them. And the inspector, when he saw them right away, it's like, you know, so we had to get all the UL and make sure it was approved and all that. But I figured, you know, if we save 30 seconds a box, if I'm doing 818 guest rooms and I save a half a minute a box, each guest room has a dozen boxes in it. You know, I save 6 minutes a room times 818 rooms. And it adds up, you know. And in a smaller way, on smaller jobs, it adds up. So when I've always got my guys, when Viking and Gray Bar, Warner, when they have their counter days, when they're showing off new materials and they got the reps there and they're serving hot dogs or steak or whatever they're doing, I always tell my guys, go there. And I know they're going to screw around for a while because they're going to see all their old buddies and stuff like that. But if they come back with one good idea of a piece of material that's going to save us money, and they have. They've come back with ideas and said, you know, we've been using these Colorado gym things. We're not going to use them anymore. Now let's use these Madisons because they're 3 times as fast. They look neater. They're a little bit more money, a couple more pennies. Now, if you're a contractor that didn't understand where you made your money, you'd go, well, there's no way because I buy 3,000 of these a year and I'm not paying 2 cents more for them because it's going to cost me $60 a year more or whatever the thing is. But instead, if you're the kind of guy that goes, okay, 2 things are happening here. Number one, they're thinking about being productive and how they can be more productive. If I let them buy what they want to buy, they're going to prove it's faster. Right? I found that too as being a foreman, is if I go out and tell a guy, okay, we got to feed that motor on the end of the room. And I say, my vision is you're going to get on your lift and go right over the top of the room like this with your pipe and get to that point. You go, you know, if I do that, I got to offset around some of these beams and stuff. I would rather go on the top of the wall all the way around, even though it's a little further. And I'll say, that works as long as it meets the code. He would prove to me if I said, you got to have this done by 2 o'clock this afternoon, 1 o'clock, he'd be back. You go, boy, that was really fast way of doing it. They want to be in charge. It's human nature. You got to work with human nature. So you already answered that question. What can we affect? So now look at this. If I go out and beat up my vendors, I can find some savings, right? Commodity material, routinely, if we bundle up a bunch of commodity material, maybe from a couple jobs or something like that, Viking would normally sell me a stick of 1/2-inch pipe for $2.20. I can maybe beat them up and get them to sell it to me for $2, $2.10, $2.05. So I can save a little bit there. Typically, you're going to pick up 3 to 5% on that. Quoted material, if you're really ruthless and you really beat up your lighting vendors or your gear vendors, you can maybe get 1% out of them. The reason you can't get much more than 1% out of them is because they've already competed for the business on the front end. Your commodity material people haven't competed for the business. Remember, those are just numbers we have in our database. Your quoted material people, they've already gone to GE and got everything that they could get out of them, and they've gone to, you know, Generac and got what they could get out of them, and so they're going to come back and go, okay, this is coming right out of my commission or my bottom line, so this is all I can give you. So you can't pick up much there. It's very difficult. Subcontractors, again, they competed on the front end. Remember, we got quotes from them on bid day. How can I get any more money out of this poor sub that's probably a smaller business than mine and he's struggling to make it? Labor costs. If we're smart on our labor costs, we can grab 5% on our labor costs. 5% isn't really that much to squeeze out of your labor. If you think of that, leaves you 95% of the hours still there. Actually, when I worked for ERC and I was running big projects for him, I ran a lot for one particular vice president in the company, and he and I actually happened to have been friends since high school. And he used to cringe when he would see my purchase orders come in for my material. And he says, you're the only guy I know that he said, your jobs always come in 10% more on material, but 10% under on labor. And what the material he was talking about is this commodity material, because I was out there buying the special drill tips, having somebody make me brackets, all those kind of things that he didn't put in his bid. But by doing that, I was trading material dollars for labor dollars. I run out of time here? I'll wrap up quick. So if I got my 5% out of this, by the time you take 5% times 15% of the total cost of the job, you've only picked up 0.75% in actual profit. Quoted material the same way. Well, I went out and beat up those subs or those vendors. Now they're a little ticked off at me. They might not be so anxious to give me a good price the next time. And look at the little scrawny amount of money I picked up. Was it really worth it? to ruin the relationship. This comes back to the relationships. Subcontractors the same way. Does it make any sense to go after that poor little subcontractor that's working out of his garage, or he and his wife are running a business? The amount we get back from that sub is so minuscule. But you know what? I know big shops that beat the hell out of their subs. And it makes no sense. You know, you make them a weaker competitor, you make them, you know, you ruin the relationship for what? Okay, now if I could save 5% on labor costs, now we're talking, now we got 2%. If you remember, what was our total profit at the end of the year?
3 to 5.
Well, what does that do to the two? If you had 2% on the 3%, that's pretty nice, isn't it? If you add all these items up, you added 3% to your net profit at the end of the year, so you've doubled your net profit at the end of the year. And where did most of it come from? Labor. By not really getting that much more out of it, just being smart how you run your labor. Another thing we do for our guys that's fairly unique for a shop our size, but I've been doing it for years, is we have standardized gang boxes that have print tables on them and a place in there where they can line up all their chargers. It has an outlet strip in it. It has all their fasteners in the gang box, and then they get another shelf or set of shelves that look like bookcases that have all their material laid out on it. We lay it out the same way on every job, so a guy can come in there and he knows, okay, I just went from Andy's job to Bob's job. I know the 1/2-inch connector is on the right end of the second shelf. That's where I'll find him. So he just walks over and gets the 1/2-inch connectors. He doesn't have to search through the gang box or go out to the guy's truck or anything like that. It's all laid out for him. So labor savings. We could pay our guys less, right? Would you get the best guys? Would they stick around? Would they have a good attitude? No, that's not the answer. We could have a carrot. We could bonus them at the end of the job. That works for a while, but then pretty soon they expect a bigger bonus on the next job. You know, and there's maybe some little combination of those things. There's the stick, right? You could threaten to fire him if he doesn't bring it in on the labor, but then you'd have to follow through on your threat. I worked for a shop like that, and I swear to God, they tried to fire their way to success. It was a union shop. They'd bring guys out of the hall. They wouldn't train them. They wouldn't give them tools. They wouldn't give them material. They wouldn't give them information. They wouldn't support them. And then when they failed, they'd fire them. And I took the two owners in a room one day. I was kind of an operations manager and trainer for them. I took them in a room one day and I said, you guys, quit firing guys. You can't fire your way to success. We're either going to find good people and we're going to train them, or, you know, I basically was so frustrated I was ready to quit over their insistence on firing people as soon as they fail. No, hopefully we just paid some tuition for them to learn something. Hopefully they've learned a lesson, we've learned a lesson, and we'll move on. Another way you can do it is apprentice labor, but there's problems with that. You know, they might not have the knowledge for the job, and there's ratios that you have to maintain and so forth. So we mix in a little apprentice labor. Labor saving tools is huge. Labor saving materials is another one. And those are things as the estimator, project manager, purchaser, you can have control over. Now look at this. Remember my example of I spent 10% more on material and saved them 10% on labor? Look what this did to the bottom line. Remember before I had savings of 5%, here I have extra cost of 5%. So my commodity, it's kind of a reverse thing, but my commodity prices went up. My quoted material, same deal. I didn't change how I treated my subs, the whole thing. Look what happened to my labor now if I went up 10%. Now this is a percentage of sales, a percentage of the contract. So what did I do? I spent a little more money, which I end up giving back here. I spent a little bit more money on that commodity material, but look what I did to my profit now. I nearly tripled it. So the bottom line, if I'm doing $1 million in sales and I do a 3% profit, it's 30 grand. If I do 8.5% profit, 85, kind of nice. A $1 million shop nowadays is about a 3-man shop. If I'm running a 3-man shop, after I pay myself my wages, would I rather make 30 grand a year or 85 grand a year? You know, so now I paid myself to be an electrician. I'm one of the 3 guys, so I probably paid myself 60, 70,000 a year, and then tack on another 85,000. I could buy new trucks, more equipment to make us more efficient, take the wife to Hawaii, buy her a diamond ring, and buy a new pickup truck, and I got money left over. send my kids to private school, whatever, on the difference. It's huge. But look at this. If your shop the size of our shop, if you're doing 3 million, look what it does for you. This is the added profit by being smart. A 5 million shop. And then I extrapolated. What if you're Parsons or Hunt and you do this?
Let's say Hunt's
Yeah, they're 200, 250. It varies every year depending on what big projects they get. To return another $11 million to your shareholders. And you could take that money, which we do. We take that money and we bonus our workers and buy new trucks so they got nice shiny trucks to drive around in and add benefits onto their benefit package and all that. You know, there's a lot of things, but you at least have the discretion to do it. If you're living on a shoestring, barely getting by, you don't have much discretion. But if you think smart and build in more profit, do it. So that's kind of the economics of the contracting. So which one do you like better, this one or the first one I showed you? So, questions, comments? I think it burned up the hour. I could go for a few more hours.
Paul, do you say anything about what you need currently now? Or?
Well, right now our company's growing, and I have a designer estimator that I hired a little over a year ago. He was a June graduate a year ago, I think. And he's working out very well, and I'm thinking of adding another person to our company. And I would be looking at probably a second-year student that wants to learn about contracting and that wants to learn that business. And you first-year guys, feel free to call me in a year and see what's going on in a year from now. But part of what we do, and I think is unique, is that, and this is one of the things I promised Phil when he came to work for us, I'll teach you about this business. You'll learn about the business in a way that you won't learn about the business from an engineering firm that's going to put you in a cubicle farm and let you draw pictures all day, or from a huge contractor that's either they'll put you on a track. You'll either be going into design with them, or you'll be going into estimating with them. And I've seen the frustration of some of the people that get into big companies is they buttonhole you, they put you in the estimating department, and you stay there for 10, 12, 15 years, and you never get to project manage. You never get to get the whole picture of the business. Smaller businesses like ours, more flexible, more exciting, more room for advancement. Basically, you get rewarded as to how smart you are and how well you perform, and how you help us grow the company. So that's kind of my pitch for what we do. And I'll tell you, the guys that work for me, both in the field and the office, we have no personnel problems. People get along, they help each other, no drama. That's the way I like it. Yes, sir.
Say a large difference between the low voltage project manager side and the electrical project manager side. Like, say you already have a company that you like, and you want to do the low voltage side, or
It depends on several things. It depends on the sophistication of the contractor that you're working for, and as far as what the opportunity is. The low voltage side ends up being fairly narrow.
Yeah.
As far as what you can do. If you look at what we do on the electrical contracting side, I mean, like right now I've got projects going, rewiring all the distribution in a distribution center, 670,000 square foot distribution center. So it's big feeders, pipe, new 3,000 amp service, multiple generators all going into there. We're changing out a generator on a nursing home and doing a remodel there. We're doing retail. We're doing all kinds of stuff.
So I'm at where I've done low voltage for a little while, and then now I'm coming to the design and management side. But in the end, I want to be the project manager, but I have a company that, ECSI, that I could go through them and then probably move up to the project manager spot on that side, or go to the electrical contractor side.
Part of it is where your skills lie and where your passion lies. You can be successful in any part of the business if it fits your skills and your aspirations.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it's a varied enough career that you can change during your career. I was actually just thinking about this morning, is that I've owned businesses, I've worked as a foreman, general foreman, service electrician, and so forth for different companies. And my longest tenure in any one company is about 5 years. And now I've had this company for 5 years. And so this is now becoming the longest I've ever had a job in my whole career. So, and part of it was, I'd worked my way up in a company and you'd hit a ceiling where there was people above you and no place for you to go. And I'd either go look for another job or get headhunted away. So I get headhunted into another company in a higher position, and then one of two things that happen there. Either you hit some kind of a ceiling or you get headhunted away again. So I've been hired away from two different pretty high positions in companies before I started my own company. And so that kind of, if you're out there and you get noticed, I've done a lot of consulting work and my board work at Dunwoody and just industry stuff through NECA and that, where people get to know you, and if they have a need, they call you up and sweeten the pot until you say yes. And so that's kind of where it is. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. But one thing I would really recommend to each and every one of you, keep learning, become passionate about what you do. If you're not liking this, if you're not loving it, figure out something in it that you love. It's such a varied industry. It's a great way to make a living. It's an area that you'd never heard probably your high school instructors talk about or your friends talk about or wherever. But within construction, to be in a specialty trade, it's where you're going to get the highest pay. There's continuing job opportunities. You only put so many roofs on buildings or build up so many new buildings if you're an iron worker or something like that. But in the electrical trade, it's maintaining buildings, it's running service departments, it's adding new technology as it comes available, and it's continually learning. For me, at my age, I am still continuing. This whole LED thing is wearing out my brain because it changes so fast and there's so many opportunities to sell LED lighting. We have opportunities we don't even follow up on because we just don't have the time to follow up on those opportunities. But the key really is to be interested in the industry, to keep learning, coming back to Dunwoody, taking trade seminars, other classes and that type of thing. That's huge. It is huge. You can tell the difference right away between the people that are just doing it the way they've always done it. I mean, I worked for some guys, and this wasn't that many years ago, 7 years ago, they were still doing their estimating on spreadsheets, and basically I call that guesstimating, where they were just plugging in numbers and saying, well, this is about what the last car dealership cost. And then they would be surprised when they got to the end of the job and they didn't make money on it. It's like, well, because it's a different fixture package, it's a different layout, it's a different height of ceiling. You have to take all those things into account when you bid a job. So that's what happens if you stop learning. I actually had one guy in my exit interview. I got headhunted away from a shop where I was a vice president. And when I was leaving, I had an exit interview with the guy. And his comment to me was, I wish I had your passion for this industry. He said, for me, it's just a way to make money. That's a sad thing to say when you're in your 50s. It's just a way to make money. So, should be fun. Right, Chad? Still fun for you, isn't it?
Absolutely. Love it.
So, well, I've been doing it since if you count my trade school, it's since 74, so it's almost 40 years.
You know how old I was in 74?
Some of these guys' parents probably weren't even born then.
I was 5 years in 74. I was 5 years. We're not born in.
So, but I still love it. I'm happy to go to work every day, and it's the only game I can still play. So, well, thank you for your attention. If you got questions, feel free.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for that. No problem.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let me get you here. Absolutely.